بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Lorrain Tyranny. I'm an executive member of Serenity Islamic Mental Health Awareness, as well as a master's in counseling psychology student at the University of Ottawa. I'm honored to be introducing today's program on behalf of the rest of the Serenity team, Sister Yassin, a master's in social work student here in Ottawa as well, and Sister Berak Hussain, a registered psychotherapist, also known as a Muslim counselor. You will also hear from them later as they will be moderating today's program, inshallah. I would like to welcome you and thank you all for tuning in to today's Serenity program on boosting morale during hardships and the pandemic, sponsored by Bronze Digital. This year, we were planning our second mental health conference in celebration of our 5th-year anniversary since Serenity's inception. While it's unfortunate that our conference had to be rescheduled, we are blessed to be hosting our first virtual event, especially since we are fortunate enough to be hosting a panel of 3 reputable and distinguished guests, Sister Anisa Diab, Sheikh Azhar, Nasser, and Hassanain Rajabali. Thank you, respected panelists, for joining us today. Before we begin our program, I would like to take a moment to tell you more about who we are and what we stand for. 5 years ago, we decided to start the conversation on mental health in response to our community's growing need for discussion on mental health awareness from a Muslim perspective. We launched monthly psychoeducational workshops on various relevant topics, including informative presentations on stress, depression and anxiety, suicide, drugs and addictions, to events on wellness and spirituality, and many more. These mental health events successfully led to Canada's first Muslim mental health conference, held in May 2016. Alhamdulillah, the Serenity conference captured the attention of local and international media, as well as the attention of the Muslim community, which is in much need of addressing these issues. We worked with professionals from a variety of different ethnic backgrounds, motivated by the same goal, which is to raise awareness for mental health in the Muslim community. Last year, we continued the conversation by exploring deeper topics related to grief, balanced lifestyles, nutrition, emotional intelligence, and mindfulness. Today, we acknowledge that the world is going through trying and novel times. As Muslim Canadians, we are united with the rest of Canada and the rest of the world in the challenges we face in light of the COVID-19 and coronavirus pandemic, and the unfortunate events that have transpired in the past few weeks, highlighting the maltreatment and racism faced by the Black community in the US and Canada. These challenges and tragic events highlight the need for us to pay special attention to our mental health and well-being. The hope is that today's program will foster useful discussions on how we could approach these difficult times and in a more positive and rewarding way, whether it be through mental, spiritual, and physical needs. Now that you're familiar with who we are and a little bit about what the program is going to be about today, I'm going to give the mic over to Sarah Yassin, who will introduce to you our esteemed panelists. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Lorraine, for that introduction. We are honored to have with us today Sister Anisa Diab, Sheikh Azhar Nasser, and Hassanain Rajabali. Sister Anisa Diab received her BA in psychology with a minor in Spanish from Salisbury University and her MS in community counseling from the University of Scranton. She's a national certified counselor and distance credentialed counselor in good standing. Anisa Diab worked as coordinator for the Stand For You suicide prevention program at Salisbury University's Counseling Center. She also served as a member of the board of directors of the Jesse Clump Memorial Fund for Suicide Prevention. Most recently, Anisa worked as a crisis counselor for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Currently, she provides Muslim mental health wellness support online through her website at anisadiab.com. Anisa collaborates with campuses, youth groups, and other organizations to offer presentations on mental health and wellness, suicide prevention, Islamic teachings, and dealing with Islamophobia. Welcome, Sister Anisa, joining us from New York, USA. Sheikh Azhar Nasser, joining us from Vancouver, Canada, was born and raised in Michigan and has a degree in cultural anthropology from the University of Michigan. After completing his academic studies, he pursued his religious studies at the Hawza of Najaf under the offices of Grand Ayatollah Sistani and Grand Ayatollah Hakim. In addition to his extensive study of classical religious texts, he also taught introductory courses to Western students at the seminary. Sheikh Azhar has a deep passion for the study of the Holy Quran, which is evident from his lectures and discussions. He continues to teach courses online and has recently published a book titled The Grand Tour, Quranic Descriptions of Paradise. Sheikh Azhar is the religious director of CBE, an organization which specializes in the production of short, spiritually uplifting videos. Sheikh Azhar is the author of 2 books, The Grand Tour, Quranic Descriptions of Paradise, published in 2018, and Spiritual Prescriptions, published in 2019. Sheikh Azhar is the religious director of curriculum planning. He is also a co-founder of Tasneem Institute. Welcome, Sheikh Azhar.
Thank you for having me.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Sara, for the introductions. Last but not least, joining us from Dearborn, Michigan is Hajj Hassanain Rajabali. He's a popular motivational speaker who's traveled worldwide, mashallah, to lecture on Islam and various social issues. He has debated and conducted dialogues with atheists and people of other faiths to promote unity and to uphold common moral values in a caring and sharing world. He's a graduate from the University of Colorado with a degree in molecular biology and psychology. Hajj Hassanain is an active philanthropist who promotes education and programs to alleviate the burdens of poverty. He is the director of Wise Learning, which provides kindergarten to grade 12 college prep academy and after-school services in Dearborn Heights and a full club facility in Houston, Texas. He runs a successful internet company called NetSite Corporation, which specializes in global network services, including mobile technology. Hajj Hassanain is also the camp director of Camp Taha, the world's first Muslim-owned camp located in Columbiaville, Michigan, where youth from around the world participate during the summer. He came to settle in the USA as a child, emigrating from Tanzania, East Africa, and he has a daughter named Zainab. Welcome, Hajj Hassanain.
Thank you.
Inshallah, for the program today, we have received great questions from participants from all around the world, which we'll be presenting to our speakers, and they will take turns answering them. We also encourage our participants who are joining us, inshallah, today to send in their live questions that are topic related, inshallah. So we're going to begin with the first question on how can one channel the anxieties that develop during these trying times and channel them into worship or fellowship opportunities. I'm going to ask Sister Anisa to begin with this, inshallah, and then we'll take turns with our other esteemed speakers.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm so excited about this event today and honored to be a part of this. So to answer the question of, how do you channel your energy and your anxiety into worship and opportunity during this time, first we need to recognize that true character is revealed in times of crisis, right? And we need to normalize that this life is inherently difficult. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in the Quran when he says in Surah Al-Baqarah, لَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ فَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, right? That Allah is certainly going to try you with loss of lives, with loss of wealth, with loss of all of these different losses, right? And that we should be prepared, and that he gives glad tidings to those who are patient, who say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. So Allah has not promised that life is going to be fair. In fact, he promises the exact opposite, that life is going to be difficult. So we might have a lot of conflicting emotions right now. I think many of us are trying to feel grateful for what we have, but we also are a little bit worried about what the future might hold. You can be optimistic about what's going to happen next and the opportunities that are in front of you, but also disappointed that maybe you planned certain things this year, a graduation, a wedding, a trip, and it wasn't able to happen. It fell apart. You might feel hopeful in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also fearful around loss and death of loved ones. But one of the gifts that we're given is this free will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed us with. And so we can choose right now where we want to put our focus. We can either fall apart and start catastrophizing and thinking about what the worst possible thing is that's going to happen. Try to predict the future by making up dramas and scenarios in our own grow from this. How can we make the best of this time? And I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us in every time period for a reason. And this is not an accident that you are where you are right now. So I like the word that was used here of channeling, because that's exactly what we need to do. We don't want to let that anxiety sit and fester. What we want is to visualize ourselves taking hold of that anxiety and then transforming it into something else that's going to optimize our potential in difficulty. I know personally, I've seen a number of clients, just reaching out to me during this time. There's definitely been an uptick on my end because people are taking the time now to realize and that they've got they need to do the self-work, that there are some issues maybe they haven't been paying attention to, some issues at home they haven't been dealing with, and that it's a good time to do some people are recognizing you have it at this moment, and they're not able to see the future anymore. They're not able to plan. They spend their day very tearful and kind of this just not seeing the light, not seeing the hope anymore. So I think this is a good time for us all to do some self-work, to become more resilient so that we can transform that energy, inshallah, into positivity. And so I think the first step is to work on ourselves before we try to go out and make other changes in the world, right? I have clients saying to me, this is a blessing. This time is a real blessing. I've had time to reconnect with the Quran again in a way that I haven't done for a really long time. So what opportunity is this pandemic giving you, and how can you seize it? And I think the fact that we have access to this kind of technology is absolutely beautiful. I wish that when I was younger, we had this kind of access. I used to drive hours and hours to go to lectures and different programs. I'd get on the plane just to go participate in something like this. And the fact that we have this at the click of a button is such a blessing. So, let's utilize these mediums to promote Islam, to promote the issues that we're concerned about, whether it's mental wellness, racism, Islamophobia, misogyny, whatever it might be. We have an incredible opportunity to reach people all over the world with our message now.
Bless you, sister. And indeed, that's such a good perspective from a therapist's point of view. And let's get a few perspectives now from the Hajj Hassanain. If you could also put your input on this in terms of how can one channel the anxieties that develop during these trying times and channel them into worship or fellowship opportunities. Tafadhal, Hajj.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the question, obviously, when Allah says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ, we made mankind in a state of trepidation. This is, as Sister Anisa mentioned beautifully, that our life is built around stress, and mankind is constantly going to be under stress. The question is, how strong do we get to manage stress so that we get to higher stages? As we know, when we do get under stress, it's a very positive reality because that's what makes us stronger. You look at an athlete, you'll see that they can only get stronger when they're stressed. People who go to the gym and lift weights to get bulkier will only get bulkier when they do indulge in stressful acts. So stress is good, but it's how you look at stress. If you look at stress in the negative and you see the glass is half empty, then the anxieties will pile up and it'll take us in the wrong direction. But if we see the glass is half full, then we will feel that stress is really good. Now Allah says, "La yukallifullahu nafsan illa wus'aha." We don't put a burden on you except that which you can handle. So we do know that when Allah gives us the stress that He gives us, then we can handle it. Now, unfortunately, sometimes we go out into the ocean trying to drink the water of the ocean, or we take too big a bite from something that we cannot swallow, and then we get into trouble. So many a times we have to also validate what is causing our stress. Sometimes it's my neighbor's nice car that I must have, and now I'm going to go out there and work 3 jobs just to make my payment so that I can get an equal car or better. Well, that's unnecessary. So when we channel stress, we have to figure out what's causing the stress, number one. What are the values behind the stress? And can we utilize the stress in a positive way? As was mentioned by Sister Anisa once again, that this lockdown that we are going through currently can be looked at 2 ways. We can see this as a way by which we are being restricted. We cannot do much. We find this to be a big burden. It may be, causing us greater anxiety. Or you can look at it from a different perspective and say, okay, let me see what I can do with this. I mean, I think about people like Nelson Mandela in prison for more than 2 decades. Imagine in a small cell that is so small you can hardly walk in it. To be in that for that long a period of time, how do you keep your mental sanity? And then to come back out of prison and to become the first leader of a new state in South Africa, that's telling as to how a person can manage stress. I believe that if we live for the greater good for the future, and knowing that we are returning to Allah and there's a greater cause in life, then I think we can channel this stress much better. And of course, putting ourselves in positive environments. I consider myself quite proactive, and I like to look at life in a very positive way. And I feel very optimistic with most issues in life. But I also get drained when I hang around people who are what we call energy vampires. People who are constantly negative, who constantly feel the world is coming to an end, and no matter how many positive statements you make to them, they spin it somehow to give it a negative spin. You don't want to be around those kinds of people, or at least you change their attitudes. So I believe that channeling this energy requires reflection, understanding the values of life, and knowing that actually stress is not a bad thing. The minute you see stress as a good thing, our attitude will change. I'll give you a simple example. Imagine you walk into a room and you see a person and you say, I don't like that person for no reason. Or I don't like people who are wearing a certain color or a certain dress or who look a certain way. Just that negative approach. Now, even if that person is an angel with the best character, most likely I'm going to approach that person negatively and I'm going to cause a negative reaction. It's how we approach things. And when we approach things negatively, then positive things start to become negative. And when we approach those apparent negative things in a positive way, then most likely we will make them positive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hajj. Really appreciate your input. Sheikh Azhar, what are your thoughts on this question? Sorry, can you repeat that? Go ahead.
Yes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for your participation and for lending us your ears. So the question is, how can one channel the anxieties that develop during these times and channel them into worship or fellowship opportunities? And I really, just like Sister Anisa mentioned, I really do like the word channel, because I think that, when we have anxiety, when we worry, when we're stressed, I think one of the most effective ways to channel that anxiety is to really verbalize those fears and those worries and make them into a private dua. There's a beautiful narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam where he says, "Ajibtu liman yaghtam." I am amazed at the one who is distressed. كيف لا يفزع إلى قوله تعالى. I'm amazed at the person who is distressed. How do they not turn to the words of God? And then the Imam alayhi salam mentions verses 87 and 88 from Surah Al-Anbiya, where Allah speaks to us about the life of Yunus. وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَن لَّن نَّقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ. We know the story of Yunus. He ends up in the belly of the whale. He's covered in these layers of darkness. And chances are you and I are not going to end up in the belly of the whale. We can think of this as a metaphor for the dark times in our lives. And you find that when he's in the belly of that whale, you can imagine the anxiety that he felt. You can imagine the distress and the sorrow that he was experiencing, the helplessness that he felt. So what does Yunus alayhi salam do? He channels that anxiety into dua, and he makes one of the most effective du'as. What does he say? وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَنْ لَن نَقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ. He called out, meaning he verbalized that anxiety. فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَنْ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنْتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. There is no God but you. Glory be to you. I have wronged myself. And then look at what, and this is why Imam al-Sadiq mentions this ayah. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ. Allah says, we responded to his call. فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ. And we rescued him from his distress. And then what does Allah say at the end of the ayah? وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. This was not an isolated incident. This is not just this random dua that just happened to be answered. Allah says, and this is how I rescue the believers. Meaning that if anyone channels their anxiety into dua and they sincerely reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah says, I'm there. وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So just as Brother Hassanain mentioned, just as Sister Anisa mentioned, that anxiety, stress, and hardship, they are an essential part of life. We would not develop spiritually were it not for these trials and tribulations. So one of the most effective ways to channel anxiety is to turn your anxiety into dua. Like actually talk to Allah about the things that cause you stress. Talk to him about the things that you're worried about. You're worried about your finances? Mention that. You're worried about the future of your children? You're worried about your health? Talk about that. That's exactly what Nabi Yaqub alayhi salam did. You know, turning anxiety and hardship into dua is the way of Yaqub. You know, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. I grieve and I complain of my grievances. I complain of my grief to Allah. And when you look at the literature of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam were masters at channeling stress and anxiety into the most beautiful du'as. They mastered the art of complaining to Allah, and complaining to Allah is an act of worship. And in addition to that, you know, just as Hajj Hassanain mentioned, it's important to be around positive people. It's important to surround yourself with people who are optimistic. You know, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ittaqullah wa kunu ma'as sadiqin. You gotta choose your company, wisely. If you're around negative people, chances are that negativity is going to rub off on you. So surround yourself with positive people, and turn those worries and those anxieties into your own dua. You don't always have to recite a formal dua. Sometimes the most beautiful supplications are those spontaneous duas that you make when you're under stress. So I mean that's how I think that we can effectively channel our anxiety.
Thank you, Sheikh Azhar, for sharing your insight on that question. The next question actually is, we're going to start off with you as well, Maulana. The question is, what are the Islamic recommendations through the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam concerning self-care during times of stress? And how is this related to secular mindfulness practices? For example, dhikr as a form of meditation.
What makes the religion of Islam so unique and so beautiful is that Islam has a holistic approach to treating stress and anxiety and trauma. You know, in the secular world, they will only treat the mind and the body. But in the Islamic tradition, we treat the mind, the body, and the soul, the ruh, the nafs. One of the most powerful statements that I've come across is a letter that Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam wrote to Harun al-Rashid. Many of us, if you think about the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, when I say the word musibah, most likely the first Imam that comes to mind is Imam al-Hussain, because of the day of Ashura. So there is no day like the day of Ashura, but because there was an enormous amount of calamity that befell the Ahlul Bayt on that day. But I would argue that, if we say that there's no day like the day of Imam al-Hussain, I would say that there are no years like the years of Musa ibn Ja'far. I think that we can agree that the Imam alayhi salam was put through an incredible amount of torture. And when the Imam alayhi salam is in the dungeons of Baghdad, he invokes a very important Islamic concept, and that is, the impermanence of this life. So he writes this letter to Harun al-Rashid, a very beautiful letter, and he says to Harun, who's living lavishly, who's living in his palaces, he says, إِنَّهُ لَنْ يَنْقَضِيَ عَنِّي يَوْمٌ مِنَ الْبَلَاءِ إِلَّا انْقَضَى عَنْكَ مَعَهُ يَوْمٌ مِنَ الرَّخَاءِ. Imam al-Kadhim says, there is not a single day of hardship that passes me, except that a day of ease and comfort also passes you. حَتَّى نَقْضِي جَمِيعًا, until we all finish this life, until we all reach a day in which the wrongdoers are at loss. So self-care, when we talk about self-care, number one, we have to understand that no matter how much you care for yourself, no matter what you do, hardship is inevitable. And we have to accept that. We have to accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us to develop our souls. And the only way that your soul will mature is to go through these trials and tribulations. Now, when we talk about self-care, there's we mentioned you mentioned prayer. Secularists often mention this idea of meditation. Now, in the Islamic tradition, we have the best meditation, and that is in the form of our daily prayers. Now, why is it that salah is so important? Why is dua so important? It's because, brothers and sisters, and this is something that's even mentioned in cognitive therapy, and maybe Sister Anisa or others can comment on this. In cognitive therapy, we learn that our thoughts impact our feelings, which shape our behaviors. So if we want to change our behavior, we have to first modify our thoughts. And when we modify our thoughts, it's going to have an impact on our behavior. Now, when we're under stress, when we're under an enormous amount of stress, we have to, number one, remind ourselves of who our creator is, right? You and I feel powerless. Ya ayyuhalladhina, ya ayyuhan nasu, antumul fuqara'u ila Allah. And that's one of the wisdoms of calamity and hardship. It's this reminder that we are in need. We are inherently in need. So through salah, we modify our thoughts about who our creator is. We also shape our thoughts about who we are in relation to him. And you find that even when you look at the life of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, it's not an accident that Imam al-Sajjad uses ibadah as his form of self-care after the tragedy of Karbala. It's not a coincidence that the Imam who survives, who witnesses Karbala, becomes known for his du'as. He becomes known for particularly his sajdas. And I've mentioned this in some of the previous sessions, just the physiological, the psychological benefits of sujood, because when you're in sujood, you're directing blood flow to the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is really the command center of the mind. So when you're in sujood, it's essentially massaging the brain. So Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam spent a lot of time in sujood. That was his form of self-care. So I think that in addition to our daily prayers, that we have to kind of incorporate some more informal communication with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because our prayers, our du'as impact, they help us modify our thoughts. And when we change the way that we think, it affects our feelings, the way that we feel, and in turn that will improve and really adjust the way that we conduct ourselves.
Thank you, Sheikh Azhar. I think it's interesting you bring that up because we usually look at the aspects of our religion as just the religious duties that we have to do, whether it's daily or whatnot. But we can look at these a'mal as definitely something as self-care. And obviously we can add on speaking to God as well. I'm going to also ask this question to Hassanain. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheikh. Well, when we say that, and sister, you make a good point. You made a comment that we see it as just religious duties. That's where the biggest problem lies, is that when we take religion as an ancillary activity, sidelined, for the Christians on Sundays, for the Jews on Saturdays, for the Muslims on Fridays, and then the rest of our time, we are busy spending with our worldly material pursuits. And then we wonder why we're so conflicted in life, and we're finding things are just not, in synergy. And it's because we have divided our lives into a church and a state, or into a mosque and a state, into a synagogue and a state, where we say, well, religion comes one day or 2-3 days, or I turn to religion when I have a problem. And then I'm a survivor in the middle of the ocean or in the jungle, and now I'm going to do my worldly matters. And when I have a problem with my worldly matters, I'm going to open up the closet called religion, and I'll take out the medicine that's needed. This concept, unfortunately, is where most people live under, and it's a satanic design to divide us spiritually. You see that Fir'aun, according to the Quran, in Surah Al-Qasas, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shows how Fir'aun divided the communities. And you find that that system of division is how you weaken a people. And you find that when we divide our spirituality, our connection with God, towards the material and then towards the spiritual, and when we divide them and we keep them as two separate entities, we will develop anxiety, even if we're very intelligent and very sharp-minded. Even if we accomplish great feats in material worlds, we will find that we're not happy, we're not satisfied. And that's prevalent, you can see, in people who are very entrepreneurial, even people like Steve Jobs, for example, very entrepreneurial, but you find when you look at them, they don't have that sukoon, they don't have that inner satisfaction, because what happens then is that there's a division. There's a worldly material division, and then there's a spiritual domain. And we feel that we will cross over every once in a while when we need it. You find all issues of philosophical thought that people struggle with, for example, evolution versus creation. When you look at, for example, politics and religion, when you look at science and religion, you will see that there is this, or people who say that, are you religious or not religious? Religious people are people who believe in God, and then atheists are not religious. These terminologies are poison pills designed to take our spirit away, where we are not able to handle, we cannot reconcile, because we have looked at it the wrong way. It's like I want to build a car, and my understanding of the physics of Earth is very different from what it's really happening. Then I'm going to build something that's not going to work, because the physics of the world is just not going to meet me. And I'm going to struggle, and I'm going to get very frustrated with life. That's what we're going through in life today. We separate our religion from our day-to-day affairs, and we feel that religion should come in sometimes, and that's why we use this terminology. Oh, he's very religious. Erich Fromm, Shade Mutahari writes in his books, Erich Fromm, who was a German philosopher, said, religion is a way of life. Nobody is irreligious. Everybody has a religion. The question is, what is that religion? Is it towards God? Is it focused towards God? Or is it focused towards something other than God? Taghut. And Allah says, فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ اسْتَمْسَكَ بِالْعُرْوَةِ الْوُثْقَى. Allah says, just realign yourself. You don't have to choose religion, no religion. You are fixated in it. فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ. It's a system of God. You can't change that. So when we psychologically, socially, and spiritually understand that everything is holistic and we have to manage it and realign ourselves within this holistic paradigm, we will start to feel much more comfortable because the system will start to work naturally. It'll become fine-tuned. So very important. When we talk about, for example, evolution and creation, which one is it? Is it evolution? Is it creation? Look how they strategically separated two entities which can never be separated. It's absurd. It's amazing how scientists who claim to be so methodical and empirical in this matter have strategically managed to confuse the world in ways by which to throw wool over their eyes to convince them against God. Because I look at these attempts purely aimed at challenging us against God. Okay, in schools, when you look at it, for example, we teach them one way against the other. These poison pill institutions that come in and poison our minds in a systematic way, what they're causing us to do is to start to now figure out the truth when we're aiming with only lies. You know, there was a philosopher who said that some countries are masters of two lies. I don't want to mention the name. You know what I'm talking about. And you find that and they keep their citizens busy debating which of the two lies is the truth. Now imagine there are already two lies. Imagine you're struggling constantly to figure out which one is the truth. You know how frustrating that is? You know how much anxiety that leads to? When you and I bark up the wrong tree or you go up the wrong place thinking it's the right place, it's very complicated. Even the smartest person starts getting confused. That's where the problem lies. So my suggestion is combine and understand the whole universal principle in one vision and see where does each one lie within the spectrum. Where does science lie? Where does religion lie? And you'll see that the deen, the ethical system of the human race, the divine system, is the all-encompassing reality. And then the empirical sciences that we listen to, those are all secondary, tertiary matters. Many a times people in science try to make those as the primary. Science is the mother of all, they will tell you. That's a lie. Because now you're conflating something that's not true. And the minute you lie and you think it's the truth, you will spend the rest of your life trying to convince the world that the lie is the truth. And that's very, very stressful. So my advice to us all is let's focus ourselves on understanding that when people ask you about evolution and creation, say creation, evolution is a created system. Evolution is a created system. Simple. When he says to religion and science, says science is a subset of religion. What about God? And God is the dominion of all, and all material matters and pursuits are under his jurisdiction. It's a very simple realignment. And once we understand that, it's a 24/7 prescription. And I'll tell you one reason why there's an attempt to separate. Because when false religions take control of people under a theocratic system, when they're false, and then religion becomes the master of all, and he starts to block science like the Dark Ages, when the Christian faith was burning people by the stake because they were arguing that the earth is not flat. And when then religion, the false religion, starts to adjudicate the matters of the world and it doesn't work, then the world gets frustrated. And then those people who claim to be within religion, who are very myopic, who are now extremists, and in the name of God, they want to kill anybody that's not pure in their eyes, people get frustrated with that. Then what they do is they split the religion into the state and say, okay, let's manage our own state and we'll keep religion on Sundays, on Fridays, on Saturdays, and we'll take a little trickle of it, but you will not manage us because you have abused us before. That's where the real problem lies. And inshallah, when the religion of Allah, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلَهُمْ أَئِمَّةً, we will make you leaders, O mustad'afin. You will see that this synergy will emanate, and we won't have this problem of separation. Are you muted? We can't hear you, sister.
I just realized. Thank you. I said thank you for answering that question, and we'll pass on the question to Sister Anisa.
The question's already been answered very well, mashallah, by both Hajj Hassanain and Sheikh Azhar, and I'll add on just a few more words around this. But when it comes to mindfulness, it's so important, like Hajj Hassanain was saying, to understand that religion and all the other aspects of your life are not two separate things. I think people make that mistake a lot, especially when I'm working with clients who are new mothers. They don't have as much time to sit down and do their dua, to do the same things that they did before. They feel like they're losing faith, and they start to become very guilty and almost antagonistic sometimes towards themselves. But we need to be mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything we do. So I don't care if it's washing the dishes, I don't care if it's exercising, cooking a meal for your family, even your work. Before I sit down with a client, I always make a little dua to, Ya Allah, let me be the tool to help this person, help me to help the person who's sitting in front of me. Mindfulness in Islam is about seeing Allah in every single task that you do. When you clean the house, and you're doing that for the love of Allah, so that your family has a clean place to walk around, that's ibadah, right? When you're exercising out of gratitude for the body that Allah has given you, that's also worship. So we don't want to look at the two as different. And what's unique about this crisis with the pandemic is many of us are facing our own mortality right now, and that's an uncomfortable feeling. But psychologically, when we look at research, when people are prepared for difficulty, when they are psychologically prepared to know they're going to be in the future dealing with situations that are hard, they're more likely to be resilient in those situations. And we have plenty of examples from the prophets, their family, the righteous companions, that they went through a lot of struggle and difficulty. I mean, if you look at the Quran, so much of it is about the emotional turmoil that they dealt with. Why? Why do we need to know that? So that in moments like this, we can be mindful and we can connect. And so review these stories of what the prophets, the imams went through, and call on their presence and their strength to be with you. Who are you aligning yourself with right now? Who is touching your heart the most at the moment, that you can resonate with their energy? So we need to have a long-term vision at all times. When you're driving a car and you don't look straight ahead of you, let's say you're anxious, you're stressed on the road, you start looking left, you start looking right, what's going to happen? You're going to have an accident, right? You need to focus on a fixed point in front of you. And this situation is no different, that we need to be mindful of where we're headed. And, as the Holy Prophet said, mutu qabla an tamutu, die before you die, right? This is the time to prepare for that, not the time to be scared about it. It's the time to just get into that seclusion, that solitude, and ask yourself some tough questions about how you can be prepared for this inevitable reality that we're all going to face, inshallah.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Sister Anisa, for complimenting the question. So the next question we have here is to Hajj Hassanain to start off with. What are the benefits that can be gleaned from these times and that can be used to create a community support system that intersects through spiritual, emotional, physical spheres? And is there teachings from the Blessed Imams that reflect these lessons and benefits?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing.
Go ahead, Hajj.
I'm hearing a very loud click here.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. Yeah, I think when you have this quarantine, let's examine the whole terminology of the word quarantine, for example. You will see that this was actually coined by Ibn Sina in an era when there was a plague taking place. And, Quran mentions the 40 nights, 40 days, 40 years. It's a very powerful reality that we all live under. And what is it all about? It's about introspection, muhasaba and muraqaba. When you look at an individual who pays attention to what they have done, and on a daily basis, we always advise people that if you want to live a comfortable life, a life with stress, in other words, if you want to reduce stress in your life, then the smart way to do things is to assess what happened for the day. And you find that people who are very acutely astute in social relations, they're actually instantaneously evaluating while they're doing something. And that's really a skill and an art that comes over time. And the power to evaluate requires time. So when you go to sleep at night, before you close your eyes, think of what happened for the day. How many people did I meet? What was the most profound moment of the day? What did you say to that person? What happened? That's very important, because when you reassess, you'll start to see things differently. Many a times, even during a lecture, doing these sessions, for example, online sessions, I listen to a person talk on the other side. And then later on, I listen to the same recording and I realize, wow, this is so different from what I perceived the first time. When this person was talking the second time, my perception was different. So it needed a little time for things to settle and for me to sort of walk away and then look at it again and say, oh, wow, that's a different perspective. I know people who tell me that they listen to the lectures over and over and over, and each time they hear it, they hear something different, because there's an assessment, there's an evaluation, and it takes time. So when we look at the quarantine system, quarantine is the idea that you're avoiding any intrusions, right? And the word quarantine actually, in Latin, is quarantine, meaning 40. And avoiding contagions for 40 days actually prevents the spread of the contagion. And there's a movie, by the way, on Netflix called The Physician. And you should watch it on Netflix. It's a beautiful story about an English youth who had a problem with the eye and travels to go meet Ibn Sina and learns the arts of science. And the principles of quarantine are shown in that movie. So today we're going through this. When you study what's happening, is mothers are telling me that we were like robots, picking up our children in the morning, when they waking them up in the morning, getting them ready, getting their breakfast. We were like robots. Take them to school, bring them back, do this, take them to the swimming classes, take them to karate classes, take them to the extra, the after school programs. We were like these, what we call robotic moms. And our kids, if the bread is not on, Mom, where's my bread? And mom has to provide all. She said, now with the quarantine, my kids have become independent. They're cooking on their own. They're coming in the kitchen. I've gotten so many messages from our students that why? They said, for the first time we're baking cakes. Mom and I I never knew how to cook. We're baking cakes and we're sitting together. I've had siblings tell me that I never knew this was the brother I had. I never knew this was my sister. I said, what do you mean? We're 14 years old. My sister is 10 years old. I never knew I had a 10-year-old sister like this. And I asked them, what do you mean by this? He said, for the first time, I'm actually spending time to get to know my sister. And I said, what are you doing about it? He says, well, I figured out all the good things about her, and I figured out all the things that get on my nerve. And I said, what are you doing about the ones that get on your nerve? She said, well, I managed to swallow and redirect my energy so that I don't get annoyed with my sister. And now my relationship with my sister has never been better. So these are all the silver linings of these kinds of relationships that Allah puts us under, right? And nobody can guarantee. When we look at the quarantine, said, oh, this is a pandemic and it's so difficult and I'm dying to go out and meet people. You have to be creative. What if you're a political person and you made a statement, and because you're a person of truth, the way Imam, like Sheikh Azhar mentioned, you look at, for example, Imam Musa ibn Jafar al-Kadhim, right? Decades in prison. It's not a joke. It's the worst thing a person can suffer through is when their free will is taken away. where they're confined in places and they can only do what the master tells them. You know how debilitating that is? I mean, if you want to see debilitation, solitary confinement, take them away from other people. Human beings are naturally gregarious. And when we take people away from each other, it's a very painful experience. But what does a person do under those circumstances? Well, they say, necessity is the mother of all inventions. And when you invent new ways, yourself was amazing, but it couldn't have come out until I had this trial. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, when, as Sister Anisa mentioned beautifully, long-term vision, very important. But when you have long-term vision, you can practice patience. People who don't have long-term vision cannot practice patience. And what does Allah say? Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. Indeed, Allah is with the patient ones. Here, there's a difference when the patient ones are with Allah. Here, Allah is with the patient ones. Inna Allaha ma'as sabirin. Imagine how Allah loves the patient ones. Well, when does patience come into play? When we have long-term vision. When does long-term vision come in? When you and I have the understanding of the purpose in life. So it's all interconnected pieces of the puzzle. We just have to realign it. I always believe every human being is born with the necessary sets of dots needed to be connected to reach Allah. But they are broadly spread, you see. As we grow older, experience increases and the dot density increases and the vision becomes sharper. It's like when you look at pixel technology, the further the dots, the more jagged the image looks. The greater the density of the dots, the finer it looks. So that's one aspect, is the data bank starts to increase over time through experience. Number two, the most critical part is, where did you place the dots? If the dots are misplaced, then you will be looking at the wrong image. You will be in the dark, swearing that the leg of the elephant is a tree. Okay, I'm using this metaphor that's commonly used. How do we get a clear picture? You've got to take divine guidance. You've got to take the messenger's pathway. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. This verse completes it all, because hub here is actually connecting with Allah in proximity. The closer we get to Allah, the more love we have. It's a very simple relationship. Mawadda is the actual transaction of that love, which we call hub, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what will happen then? وَيَغْفِرْ لَكُمْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. God will protect you from your wrong thoughts, from your wrong actions. You will become refined. You will become better. I think that's very important to understand. So in perspective here, when we are put under these situations of quarantine, we should not complain. Let me give you an example. Let's take a very simple example. Imagine we became sick. Forget about the globalization. I think this globalization lockdown, I think it's phenomenal. I think it's brilliant. And I'll give you the reason why. You and I can fast most of the year individually, but the impact is not equivalent to Ramadan. So what's the difference? The difference is it's more amplified because all the Muslims are doing it, relatively speaking. That amplification changes the dynamics. When you have some kind of a lockdown where the entire world is acutely aware of it, it changes the dynamics. And I think that's very beautiful. But I give a simple example. Imagine you become sick and the doctor said you'll be bedridden for 6 months. There are two options. Either we look at it positively and find the silver lining in it and become better, or we complain, oh God, why did you make me sick? I hate this. I'm going to go away from you now. And I condemn. It's how we look at it. I know a brother who told me, he said, I was so arrogant, very wealthy brother, very powerful brother. He said, I was arrogant, I was narcissistic, right? I was very self-centered. I was a brawlish kind of person, I would get into skirmishes and fights with people constantly. He said, then one day my back gave in and I was bedridden for 6 months in a hospital. Now imagine, he said, my arrogance was subdued. My arrogance was put on a bed and I was forced to read and I was forced to reflect. I was forced to introspect and to extrospect and to retrospect.
And lo and behold, I realized how arrogant I was. I cried every single day in bed until I realized that this was a gift of God to have put me on this bed and to have debilitated me from freely walking. He said that was the change in my life. So we have to look at everything as a rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and consider the blessings that Allah has given us and never complain and find the silver linings. And you will see husbands and wives finally are merging together and getting to know each other. It's no longer marriage of convenience. Unfortunately, on the other side, in China, they say, for example, statistically, not only in China, but everywhere in the world, that the divorce rates doubled, because for the first time, the couple started to realize that this is really not my spouse. This was a spouse with convenience. This is not the spouse I want to be with, which is kind of good. No problem. It's better to fix it now than, grow old and retire and you find out, what, this was the worst spouse I ever had. So what I'm saying is both ways can be looked at it positively. And let's bring this cancer out. Let's cure it. And let's introspect and validate it, but let's take it in a positive way and say, what can I do with what I have? Look at these online programs. Enlight, for example, Enlight Station, our station, launched in Ramadan because of the pandemic. Usually, I know Sheikh Azhar knows this, Sister Anisa knows, all of us know, Sister Berak, all of you. We get on a plane, we fly, we take a day just to get there. Then check in a hotel. Yeah, it's so much work, right? Now, split second, turn on the switches. Okay, where are you? You are in Scotland. Okay, where are you? You're in, Philippines. Where are you? Oh, subhanallah, this is amazing. So we're realigning and we are redefining ourselves. And inshallah, this will be fantastic. And they said when Imam Ali alayhi salam said there'll come a time when the world will look at each other like they're next to each other, right? With the antenna, Imam Ali alayhi salam says. And Imam Mahdi alayhi salam is going to use this technology to bring the world. And what's beautiful now is Islam is on the front lines. It is the most discussed issue on earth. The world is looking, and Sunni Shia dialogue is at the front lines. You're talking about the main media streams talking about Karbala, talking about Imam Hussain. This is unprecedented. Never imagined in my life growing up in America that this will be the common lingo and the common talk. My friends are calling me and say, are you Sunni, are you Shia? I said, you've known me for 25 years. You saw me as a Muslim. When did you learn this? He says, no, we understand the differences now. We are hearing this. And we want to know which one are you? When you enter the airport, the CBP asks you, are you Sunni, are you Shia? Our brothers went to Ziyarat recently, and they came back from Karbala. They were stopped in the Detroit airport, and they were being interrogated. And the guy said, where did you guys go? He says, went to Iraq. He said, for what? He said, went to me, we went to pay respects to the family of the Prophet. And the guy says, well, isn't that in Mecca? He says, no, the family of the Prophet, Imam Hussain. Oh, yeah, Imam Hussain. He said, yeah. So are you Sunni or you Shia? He said, no, we are Shia. Oh, good, you can come in. So the brothers looked at each other like, what? Like, why? Oh, we know you guys. You guys are fine. Come on in. CBP, literally, verbatim being told to me. I was just like, smiling. So, subhanAllah, I never imagined that the Border Patrol will be talking this way. But that's the reality we live in. This is a huge blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's capitalize on it.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for your input. I recall a few years ago, a director where I was working as a student in university, he straight up asked me, are you Sunni or Shia? And I was so taken back by that. This was years ago before the social media really blew up, but it just the link there that perhaps some people have had that kind of awareness, and we see it so much more now. Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, Hajj, for these insights. Sister Anisa, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it was already beautifully answered, but this question of what lesson can you benefit from this situation to create community support, I think it's a very personal question, actually. Like, this is a question that we have to ask ourselves, and each one of us, I believe, has a unique lesson to learn from this experience based on our circumstances. And that's what's interesting, is we are all in this together, but it's all affecting us in different ways. I have some clients, it's affecting them in terms of realizing, wow, now that I'm stuck at home with my family, I realize my communication is really dysfunctional. I'm always shouting at my kids. I don't have a good relationship with my spouse. I was running away from it before with work and busyness, and now I've got to confront it. There are some people that realize that they cannot sit with their own thoughts, like their own head bothers them, with their own mind space, and that's why you're seeing a lot of people doing these, like making sourdough bread and do it yourself mass and all these, because it's like they have to be busy. They cannot sit and reflect with what they're thinking about. So I think that this is a great opportunity to get into that spiritual solitude and to ask yourself the tough questions. And I think the toughest question you need to ask is, if this is my last year on earth, what would I be doing differently? If it is, inshallah, all of us, may Allah protect all of you who are watching, give you a long life, give your families long life. But that's where you need to make the change. And when you start here in the heart, then you can go out and do the real work in the community. Sometimes we want to jump from just being passionate about something that we see externally, but internally we haven't done the self-work. So that's how I would answer that question.
Thank you very much. And Sheikh Azhar, what are your thoughts on this? Sorry, Sheikh, can you mute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
So there's really not much to add. I think Hajj Hassanain and Sister Anisa, I think, gave a pretty comprehensive answer. But just my own personal reflection is that, this pandemic, being under quarantine, I'm just so much more appreciative, and I have so much more gratitude just for the people that make society function. And we talk about essential workers. I'm so grateful for the people that do these jobs that we call menial jobs. The people who are at the grocery stores, the people who deliver packages, healthcare workers. I have a deeper appreciation for stay-at-home mothers. I mean, I don't think any husband knew how much their wives work and how much work it takes to keep a household in order. I don't think, I learned, anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a good cook. I don't know anything about cooking, but I actually had to learn how to cook. And I have a much deeper appreciation, when I see a meal, because I know how much work goes behind preparing a meal. I mean, that's a lot of love to be able to do something like that. To be able to just look around and value the people around you. And when you value people, that's expressing gratitude to Allah. Man shakara al-makhluq shakara al-khaliq. So everyone from the mailman to the garbage man to the people who receive you when you go to the hospital, the people who prepare food for you. I think it's really a moment for us to really appreciate the blessings that Allah delivers through the people in our lives. So, and I think valuing people is an important aspect of worship. If you want to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to, appreciate the vehicles that He uses to deliver His bounties to us.
Thank you so much, Sheikh, for that as well. Sarah, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on as well, like this quarantine made a lot of us realize things about ourselves, about our families. Even the youth that I work with, they messaged me saying, I was never able, I didn't know I was able to bake or cook or had this artistic part of me. So there's a lot of good things that came out of this quarantine for sure. So the next question, we're going to start off with Sister Anisa. Both on the journey to and in the court of Yazid, Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam was not only able to maintain and support the broken and humiliated family of Imam Hussain, as she was able to use the horrors of Karbala to rejuvenate the development and expansion of Islam and piety. How can we pinpoint and replicate her actions in our day-to-day pandemic lives and after, inshallah?
Lady Zainab alayhi salam is such a beautiful model of how to deal with psychological distress. And in fact, when I've had difficult situations in my own life, I know that for me, recalling the oppression that she witnessed with her family and with herself, it really is a source of comfort to me, because I look at that situation and I say, you know what, if she could endure that and remain resilient as she was, whatever I'm facing in front of me is nothing. I can get through this. So she's been personally a huge source of comfort to me in my life through difficult times. And in particular, we all know this famous statement she said, right? When Lady Zainab alayhi salam was asked by Yazid, what she thought about what had happened to her family, what Allah had done to her family on the plains of Karbala, she says, "La ra'aytu illa jamila." I saw nothing but beauty. And I think this is such a profound statement on so many levels when you really analyze it, because this is where our long-term vision needs to be, that no matter what sacrifices we go to, stressors we experience, we have to have that long-term vision like we've been talking about, that it's no matter what stress we're facing, it's beautiful. It's beautiful when we're sacrificing in Allah's way and we're keeping that goal in mind. So we need to see the beauty of in every single situation, right? We need to have this Zainabiyya mindset, so to speak, where you see the beauty in yourself. You see the beauty in others, even if they're different skin color, they're a different culture than you, they're from a different socioeconomic background. You need to see the beauty in your difficulties. And I think, again, sometimes we just want to go out, we want to talk to other people about these issues passionately, and we got to realize we need to make an impact by starting within. Right? So it's really important that we're focusing within, we're seeing the beauty in ourselves, we're focusing on the beauty in our relationships so that we can go out and show others the beauty of Islam. Many times when I'm working with clients and I ask about their spiritual journey, how has their relationship with Allah evolved over time, where they would like to see it be, what areas they're struggling with. Many of them struggle with home, they see their family one way, religiously speaking, and then in the masjid, they put on a different act, right? So they may be growing up with double standards where, there's a lack of positive communication at home, there's a lack of peace at home, but then outside the home, it's a different story. And those children, they often grow up with a distaste or a confusion around religion. So the best way to, teach others is through your own actions. It's through your own words, when you walk the walk, when you talk the talk. And again, using the example of Lady Zainab, if we want to replicate her resilience, we have to look at two things here that she's talking about. And actually, psychological research talks about too. When people are resilient, they exhibit two main qualities. One is that they're optimists. They see the good in every situation. A lot of people, like Hajj Hassanain was talking about earlier with the energy vampires, they walk around just thinking negatively, pessimistically about everything, and they think that's a form of being realistic, but it isn't. It's a form of psychological imbalance, and actually the brain is geared towards negative thinking. We don't know this, but in psychology, there's a term called negativity bias. So if you grow up in a negative house environment, then you've got your negative thoughts, then you got Shaitan coming in with his negativity, you're not going to get through situations. So you have to actively rewire your mind to go towards positive, to see the beauty in everything that you're going through. And that takes a lot of work. That doesn't come easy. It does take practice to do, but it's necessary in order to get through hard times. And the second thing we've talked about is recognizing the impermanence of our situations. Like when I talk to people who are suicidal, for example, many times those who are on the verge of ending their life, they don't think they're going to ever get out of the problem that they're facing. They think that problem is going to last forever. It's never going to change. Whereas we see throughout our lifespans, we go through phases of life and we go through states of life, and those things are evolving all the time. So we need to be reminded that, nothing is permanent. The only thing that is permanent is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, keeping that long-term vision is really important. So again, I think in order to go out and promote Islam, to stand up for injustice, we need to make sure that we're adopting her mindset into our daily life and in all the different aspects.
Thank you, Sister Anisa. Sheikh Azhar, would you like to add your input on the question?
Okay. You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You know, Sayyida Zainab is very dear to my heart, and it's one of the reasons why I actually named my daughter after her. And you know, there's so much to say. I mean, where do you begin when you speak about Sayyida Zainab? And her greatness is not, you know, a function of who her brother was or who her mother was or who her father was. I mean, she was great in her own right. And you know, when I think of Sayyida Zainab, you know, to me, she is really the embodiment of Surah Al-Duha. And the reason why I say that is because, you know, Surah Al-Duha is a surah that was revealed to the Prophet when he was at one of the lowest points in his life. You know, revelation had been suspended, and he's being taunted by the disbelievers of Mecca, and he was going through a lot of emotional distress. You know, he had lost, you know, his children. There were, you know, economic sanctions imposed, and so on and so forth. And you find that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala really engages in what we would call today, you know, cognitive therapy. I mean, Surah Al-Duha is really like, it's a divine cognitive therapy that is customized for the Prophet. And so the surah begins with, you know, وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. And to me, you know, when Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala begins by saying, you know, by the morning brightness, you know, these are all powerful metaphors. And that is, it's essentially to say that no matter how dark your life is, no matter how dark the night is, the sun is always going to rise. It's a matter of time. I mean, it will end. And Allah says, then he speaks about, and by the night when it covers with darkness, you know, no matter how awful your day was, you're going to sleep, you know, you're going to be able to escape it. You know, the night is going to come. And then, you know, one of the most powerful parts of the surah, and I see this in the life of Sayyida Zainab, because she reiterated this, you know, throughout her sermons. Ma wadda'aka rabbuka wa ma qala. You know, when revelation suspended, the Prophet felt that he lost the most precious thing in his life, which is that divine communication. And Allah reminds the Prophet. So again, it goes back to this idea of modifying our thoughts. So Allah reminds the Prophet that Allah has not abandoned you. You know, when bad things happen to you, when hardships strike, Allah has not abandoned you. Sayyida Zainab knew, you know, when Imam Hussain alayhi salam was trampled on the day of Ashura, she knew that yes, this is a very difficult moment, but Allah has not abandoned us. مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. And then there's, again, Allah works on the cognitions of the Prophet. وَلَلْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. And the hereafter is better for you than the first life, meaning that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You know, when we go through trials and tribulations, many of us, we get into the mindset that I can't see light at the end of the tunnel. We almost develop a type of certainty that nothing's going to change and I will be in this perpetual state of darkness. Allah says, no, you know, things will get better. This is temporary. And even Sayyida Zainab on the day of Ashura, there's a beautiful moment that she has with Imam Zain al-Abidin. Imam Zain al-Abidin is in the tent and he's ill and he's looking out into the battlefield and he sees, you know, Imam Hussain alayhi salam essentially in his last moments. He was mortally wounded, fatally wounded. And Sayyida Zainab, at that moment, she consoles her nephew. She has that Zainabi optimism. She says to to Imam Zain al-Abidin, O son of my brother, there will come a day when flags will be raised in this land honoring your father. So even though she's in the middle of the storm, she sees, she has that vision. She knows that this is not the end, that there will be goodness that will come out of it, that the difficulties in this world will end. And it's not only that the difficulties will end, but the hereafter, وَالْآخِرَةُ خَيْرٌ لَكَ مِنَ الْأُولَى. And what awaits us in the hereafter is far greater than we can possibly imagine. وَلَسَوْفَ يُعْطِيكَ رَبُّكَ فَتَرْضَى. You know, and again, this is addressing the Prophet, but we can apply this to awliyaullah. I mean, what a beautiful relationship we have with Allah, that in this life we strive to please Him, and then in the hereafter, He wants to please us. I mean, think about that for a moment. That the Lord of the worlds, you are so dear to Him that it's not about Him anymore, that He wants to please you, that you become the focal point. And then, you know, when you continue the surah, Allah again, you know, is kind of, you know, working on the Prophet's cognitions, the thoughts. It's really about changing the way that you think when you're in hardship. So Allah very gently reminds the Prophet of all of the good, all of the divine grace that he has received. أَلَمْ يَجِدْكَ يَتِيمًا فَآوَى وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا فَهَدَى وَوَجَدَكَ عَائِلًا فَأَغْنَى. And you look in the sermons of Sayyidah Zainab, you know, Sayyidah Zainab was not, you know, yes, she was distraught, but at the same time, she was fully aware of Allah's grace, of Allah's blessings upon them. And when you look at her sermons, even in the court of Yazid, even in Kufa, you see that her words are replete with gratitude. They're replete with gratitude. And then, you know, one of my favorite parts of this surah is when there's a call to action, right? So the way that you deal with trauma, it's not just about modifying your thoughts, it's also about taking action. You know, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. Take care of the most vulnerable. Just because you feel vulnerable, it doesn't mean that you should feel helpless and worthless. You know, when you become someone else's shoulder to cry on, it empowers you. It gives meaning to your life. So you see that Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, even though she's dealing with the immensity of that hardship, she's still a caretaker. And when you care for others, you know, subhanAllah, there is nothing more gratifying. And this, I believe this is part of the fitrah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in us. It's a part of just the primordial goodness that we have in us. That the most gratifying thing to the human heart is to be at the service of others. And that's why studies have shown that people who volunteer, people who participate in you know, different types of community service, they live healthier and longer lives. They report higher levels of satisfaction with their lives, higher levels of happiness. So there's a call for action. You know, you have to change your thoughts, so you change your behavior. But you need good behavior to reinforce those thoughts. And we see that in Sayyidah Zainab as the guardian of the orphans, as the caretaker. You know, she didn't just crumble. She was taking care of the most vulnerable people around her. You know, the orphans of Imam Hussain. And then at the end of the surah, and again, this is really the best way to deal with hardship and trauma. The end of the surah is what? وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. You know, practice gratitude. You know, don't just think about the good that Allah has done, vocalize it. وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ. Declare the blessings of Allah. And we see this in the life of Sayyidah Zainab. You know, when she said, you know, مَا رَأَيْتُ إِلَّا جَمِيلًا, that's Sayyidah Zainab cultivating that gratitude, you know, practicing gratitude. So to me, when I think of Sayyidah Zainab, she is just this exquisite, this beautiful embodiment of Surah Al-Duha. And, you know, that's the way that I see her.
Thank you, Sheikh Azhar. Hajj Hassanain, I would like to ask you the same question as well. And if you just want to bring your attention, someone also asked a question pertaining to the same question. How can we affect and motivate our teenagers/children to use the situation positively? Oh, 1 second, I think you're muted.
I think can you hear me now? You can hear me now, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So I think that what has been discussed since the beginning of this program, a lot of factors, and I would advise the person who has asked this question to take note on some of these aspects. But in summary, we are the tree, and our children, the teenagers, are our teenagers are the fruits of the trees, and they say the fruits don't fall far from the tree. So if you and I, as parents, as leaders, as adults in the community, if we practice these conversations that we've been having with reference to obeying the commandments of Allah, emulating the footsteps of the Holy Prophet and his Ahlul Bayt, and to reflect and understand what long-term vision is and what is the value of religion and the dynamics of it, then I think our teenagers will be inclined in that direction. We were all teenagers, those of us who are not teenagers now. We were all teenagers once, and we were all affected by those around us. And of course, as teenagers, we get affected more by our peers and our friends, but that does not mean that those peers and friends are not being affected by the adults. I believe that children are the manifestation and they are the reflection of how the parents are and how their community is and their family is. So if we all practice it holistically, I think we will impact the children on a much better level. And of course, enjoin upon them to be reflective, to be introspective, to be cogitative in thinking so that they learn the art. Children are very like sponges, especially from 0 to 7, and it's how we impact them. If we teach them at that early age how to look at life in a positive way, when they do become teenagers, they will become leaders. They will become advisors to us. And I think that's what's very important. Many a times we raise our children in cocoons, like helicopter parents. We don't let them struggle the way they should. We try to make them feel better only by causing them to use the parents as a means of convenience. And you'll find that children sometimes will come to parents when they have a problem, and the minute they don't have a problem, they will abuse them. I've seen it with my own eyes. We're all victims somehow, and we have victimized sometimes too. So these are things that we have to be very cognizant of. And if we're going to make our children and our teenagers especially to reflect and to go towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to live by example. To me, Ali al-Akbar, the son of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, is a great example, of a teenager who's now going towards Karbala with his father. And his father, Imam Hussain alayhi salam, sees this vision of the massacre. And he asks his father, what is it? He said, well, we're soon going to join my grandfather, our grandfather. And Ali Akbar says, are we not on haqq? And Imam Hussain alayhi salam says, of course. He says, then let us go. Let us meet this destiny that awaits us. How many teenagers do you know can give such answers? How many teenagers do we know that will be willing to give up that beautiful life that they have ahead and to be killed and to be beheaded and their heads be put on a spear, and to say it like Ismail, who says to his father, if'al ma tu'mar, do what God has commanded you, satajidun inshallah min as-sabirin. Inshallah, God will find me among the patient ones. That level of comprehension and conversation, it doesn't come for free. It takes a lot of nurturing. Ibrahim alayhi salam and Hajra, they nurtured this child in an elegant way. So for this child, Ismail, to say, if'al ma tu'mar, without hesitation, are the kinds of children we must raise. And it doesn't come easily. First and foremost, we must be consistent in our behaviors. We must be sincere in our approach towards Allah. We cannot take our children to Sunday school and then we are doing our merry things, tell our children not to listen to something
that's haram, but then we're listening to it, and so on and so forth. This disconnection is what causes confusion. And then when you expand that for the child's experience, when their peers also practice hypocrisy, and then when the community practices hypocrisy, when the leadership practices hypocrisy, then these children become very, very disenchanted, and they become apathetic towards religion. So it's a consequence of the misdeeds of those who are supposed to be guiding people correctly. We're all responsible, and what we do and what we don't do impacts the future of our generations. And I would advise us all that the way we impact our young generations is by living with examples and talk their language. Don't shove down old ways of cultures, for example, on our next generations. The children feel suppressed with that. They feel oppressed with that. Let them express their culture, but the principles behind it should always be firmly established in the child's ethos.
Thank you very much, Hajj Hassanain, for that very thorough answer. And our next question is directed to, starting off with Sheikh Azhar, in terms of, in light of the George Floyd murder and the uprisings in the USA and other parts of the world with the Black Lives Matter movement, how can we acknowledge the presence of racism within our cultural communities, and how can we correct our actions by following clear Islamic teachings in race equality?
So as I mentioned earlier, behavior is very closely related to thoughts. And I think that if we want to change the way that we behave, we have to change the way that we think. And we have to go back to some of the most basic Islamic principles. What does Allah say in Surah Al-Hujurat? Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakran wa untha. O mankind, O people, we created you all from a single man and a single woman. And what's amazing is that many of us, we have this impression that all 7 billion people around the world today, they share a common ancestor. Maybe, and they say this common ancestor maybe goes back, hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years, whatever. But actually, scientists have discovered that our common ancestor is actually quite recent. If you look up the identical ancestors point, scientists have actually determined that every single human being on Earth shares a common ancestor that goes back 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. And this actually coincides with the flood of Nuh. So we have to really believe, we have to understand that we are literally a global family. And that's, sometimes we brush over these verses and we really forget just this basic idea that we are all the descendants of Adam. We are all the descendants of Nuh and those noble people that were on his ark. So that's number one, really just changing the way that we think. And especially when it comes to people in leadership positions, whether you're the resident scholar, whether you're on the board, whatever organization that you run, we have to validate the complaints of people of color. If someone in your masjid, if someone in your workplace comes to you and feels that they've been discriminated against, you can't dismiss that. I mean, I've seen this with my own eyes where, someone at the masjid goes to Friday prayer and they just feel unwelcome because they're black, for example, and they complain and they send an email, and no one ever hears. They don't hear from anyone. Sometimes we dismiss. We just say, oh no, that person is just being extra sensitive. Brothers and sisters, I have been to centers, and this is something that I've witnessed with my own eyes. I was at a center where, there was an African-American scholar who was invited. And I made it a point, even though this particular scholar, was visiting, and traditionally, if you're the resident scholar, you are usually lead the prayers. So there was a community where there were certain people who just were uncomfortable praying behind a black sheikh. And get this, the excuse that was given was what? We're not sure that he's he's not going to be able to recite properly. When it's someone from You know, so why is it only an issue of pronunciation when the scholar is black? When it's from any other ethnicity, no one. And subhanallah, these are the same people who don't even recite properly. You know, all of a sudden, like, pronunciation is an issue. So these things, we have to address the elephant in the room. There is a problem of racism in our communities. And look at what the Prophet does. The Prophet, in his own community, when that companion entered the majlis of the Prophet and told Bilal, who was sitting close to the Prophet, you know, Qum ya ibn as-Sawda, you know, get up, O son of the black woman, which was considered derogatory. When Bilal complained to the Prophet, did the Prophet dismiss Bilal? Did he say, oh no, you're just being too sensitive? Or did the Prophet actually take it seriously? We have to take, you know, these complaints seriously. We have to give, and the Prophet listened to people. You know, oftentimes, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, it's important for us to participate, but we need to, if you're not black, if you're not a person of color, you need to be doing more listening. You know, let them, you know, share their experiences. You know, in the Quran, what does Allah say about the Prophet? وَمِنْهُمُ الَّذِينَ يُؤْذُونَ النَّبِيَّ. There are the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, they would try to insult the Prophet. And look at the way they try to insult the Prophet. وَيَقُولُونَ هُوَ أُذُنٌ. They insult the Prophet by saying he's an ear. Can you imagine how backwards these people are? That their insult is that the Prophet listens too much. That is what we need to be, brothers and sisters. Especially if you're in a position of leadership. If someone, you know, files a complaint, if someone complains about being discriminated against, don't bury it in bureaucracy. Don't dismiss it. Take it seriously. I think that's just a simple step that we can take, is that, you know, and when we look at the boards that make up our masajid, do they reflect the diversity of the Muslim community? And this applies to race, it applies to gender. You know, people who are white, you know, people who are not black, you know, need to acknowledge their privilege. You know, if you're a male, you have to acknowledge your privilege. I mean, I can tell you from someone who's considered an Islamic scholar, I recognize my privilege as a male scholar. I can tell you for fact that female scholars are not taken as seriously as male scholars. That's a problem. So if we're gonna address that, male scholars have to admit that they're privileged. Non-black Muslims have to acknowledge that you are privileged. That's the only way we're going to be able to address these deep-seated problems in our communities. So one simple step that we can take is validate the voices of people of color. And there are many mosques, many organizations where there have been issues of race raised, but, you know, it just gets swept under the rug and no one talks about it. So we have to follow the prophetic model, which is to validate those types of complaints when they're brought forward.
Ahsantum. Thank you, Sheikhna. Sister Anisa, can you answer this question? Again, mashallah, very well thought out by our audience members who sent these in. So in Islam, we are commanded to be respected not only of others' dignity, but also their mental health. When a person is oppressed and demeaned based on the beauty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates, how does that diminish their dignity and destroy their mental health? Oh, sister, you're muted.
Okay.
You're good now.
So mental health is, we're looking at the psychology of the person, the emotional health of the person, and the social well-being of the person. So when someone is oppressed or demeaned based on the way in which Allah created them, it's impacting them on many different levels, right? It's impacting their own self-concept, how they view themselves, affecting their ability to cope. It's affecting the way in which they approach other people and relationships. So when we're talking about mental health, a lot of times people think about the individual, right? But we're also talking about community wellness here. And that's very important to realize, that is that as the individual, we live within that larger context. And so there's multiple factors that will contribute to the well-being of that person. And so I totally agree with what Sheikh Azhar was saying, is that we have a major problem, not just within our communities, but globally, with even recognizing that racism is a thing. And you hear it with comments like, I don't believe in race, we're one human race.
Or I don't see color.
I don't see color. I'm blind to that color. Even going as so far as to say Allah doesn't even see color or talk about color. This is false. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says himself in the Holy Quran in Surah Ar-Rum, ayah 22, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَاتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالِمِينَ. So Allah is saying among his signs is in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the diversity of your languages and your colors. Verily in that are signs for people of knowledge. So Allah is describing the color of people as one of his ayat, as one of his signs, as part of his beauty. So when we're denying this ayat, it's no different than living in the time of the prophets and miracles being sent down or demonstrated through, prophets at that time, and the people saying, no, this is not from Allah, this is magic, this is something else. No, this is real. And racism is not a cognitive distortion that somebody's making up in their head. I've also seen the same thing Sheikh Azhar was talking about, and with many of my clients who come to me, they express the same thing, that they want to get closer to their faith, that they're so disgusted when they walk into the masjid, everyone's in their own little clique. They come in and, nobody reaches out. They're not friendly. They make plans after a program to go out and have dinner or whatever, and they're not invited at the table. So, we're now seeing people going out and doing, being these social media warriors about this racism issue, when we have people in the masjid, forget about race or colors. If you're not from the same village they're from, you're not welcome in their group. So let's not make this a time of performative activism here, where we're talking about this issue because it's cool. If you're not welcoming people into your life that are different from you, you're part of the problem. And you know what? None of us is in a complete state of self-actualization with this issue of racism. I speak to myself first and foremost that, I've had to go through my levels of consciousness on this issue and work on myself, and I continue to listen. I continue to try to learn. But again, let's not be dismissive. When somebody says all, Black Lives Matter, and you come to them and you say all lives matter, it's like when you're at a funeral and you're mourning the loss of a loved one, and someone says, "Why are you crying? I've had people in my family die too." Okay, we're not talking about you right now. We're talking about this issue, right? If I come and I talk about, again, the lack of female scholarship that Sheikh Azhar was talking about, and how not enough women's voices are at the table with events. I've seen that myself, where it's like we scramble for events related to Lady Zainab or Fatima Zahra to have female speakers, but not with all of our events, right? Like sometimes you see an overwhelming majority of men or no women at all. So we need to have all voices at the table, inshallah. And I hope that, we don't just invite male scholarship, Black scholarship onto the table when we're just talking about racial issues. I want to see their narratives at other events too, and their voice represented, because we're missing their stories. We're missing some of the issues we're facing in the community when we're not inviting their narratives.
Thank you so much, Sister Sheikh Azhar. I think you wanted to add on to that before we speak with the Hajj?
Yeah, I just wanted to add just a small comment relating to the fetishization of white skin in the Shia culture. And the reason why I say that is that if you look at any artistic depictions of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, they're all light skinned. Imam al-Ridha, they're all light-skinned. You know, and I think this is, and they're all light-skinned. They have like black
It's
wavy
interesting.
hair. And
Sorry, Sheikh, it's interesting you say. It's interesting you say in the Shia tradition, but we also see this in the Christian tradition with the Nabi Allah, Isa alayhi salam, Jesus, peace be upon him, right?
We literally whitewash awliya Allah. I don't know why we do that. You know, there was a brother that was mentioning, the issue of race and racism in marriage proposals. You know, I can tell you this, brothers and sisters. You know, whether people want to admit it or not, they want to acknowledge it or not, many people in our community, if someone came to their daughters asking for their hand and they had the skin complexion of Imam al-Jawad, they would be turned away. Because he's too dark, right? He's too dark. Imam al-Ridha, I've seen some of the pictures of Imam al-Ridha, super white. That's not the historical Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha. It's almost as though we've done exactly what the Christians have done. We made Jesus this blonde guy this white blonde guy, and we did the same thing to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. Newsflash, their mothers were from North Africa. They probably weren't white. So I think that we have to kind of address, you know, and this is also the responsibility of scholars to make it a point to mention that, you know, the Imams were not white. You know, they were not all olive skinned and, you know, black hair. And, you know, a lot of Shias, for example, they will take offense if you suggest that Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib was a little bit short. They say stuff as if it, you know, there's something wrong. You know, we always engage in this type of body shaming. That, oh no, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib has to be 6'5". That all of the Imams have to be slim and muscular. You know, we have narrations that speak about Dawood. Dawood was pretty short, right? But again, if you look at all the artistic depictions of Dawood, this tall, muscular, you know, but that's not the historical Dawood. So I think that we have to be true to our history. We have to respect the sanctity of our history, and it doesn't need to be modified because we're uncomfortable with certain colors or certain heights or certain appearances. And this is exactly the reason why Bani Israel rejected the Prophet, because they had this expectation that the final messenger of God needs to be a Jew. It's not a Jew, and they just couldn't accept that. So I feel that we're setting ourselves up and our communities up for a rude awakening, that if Imam al-Hujjah's skin color is not right, or if it turns out that his mother is actually from, you know, North Africa, how are some Shias going to respond? Are they going to reject him because he's not light enough? I mean, there's a reason why Allah mentions Bani Israel in the Quran. It's almost as though Allah is saying, don't make the same mistakes. Don't be, because they rejected the Prophet because they were racist. So I think we have that problem in our own communities, and we have to acknowledge it.
And it makes people very uncomfortable when we've had to talk about this and look at our own and see how it has impacted, has been impacting us for years now, and how it has isolated and pushed people of different cultural backgrounds from our own community rather than bringing them in. And that's really unfortunate. Inshallah, we can benefit and learn from this in terms of how we can connect and grow from this to better that within our community and be, inshallah, proper representatives of Islam. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you, Sheikh Azhar. We're going to direct the last question to Hajj Hassanain. How did the Ahlul Bayt provide us with examples on how to evaluate our actions as a community, and how did they approach racism?
Well, as was mentioned, first and foremost, this racism that we have is, you know, there are. It's okay, Sister Berak, you can just leave it that way.
Sorry, my computer has not been very helpful today.
That's okay, because that clicking is very loud. Yeah, just leave it this way, it's fine.
Sure.
So what happens is that you find that the way our Ahlul Bayt and our prophets practiced Islam was to see every creation of Allah as beautiful. الذي أحسن كل شيء خلقه فتبارك الله أحسن الخالقين. We agree with this. So for you and I to now separate, as Sheikh Azhar mentioned, to differentiate, the Bani Israelis were receiving the short end of the stick with Fir'aun, and then when they were freed, they did the same thing to others. It's an irony. Even today, if you look at the politics of the Middle East, they have not ceased
You know, when you get the pain in the shoe, at least you now have the power of empathy. And when you lack even empathy and you start to practice the very abuse that you received, you know, Sister Anisa, you will attest that, you know, when who are the abusers? They were the ones who were abused, right? And until you evaluate the values of the negativity of that behavior, it's not going to stop. But I want to make an important point here, because what we have is a disease called institutional racism. You know, as I mentioned, there are three types of racism. There is the individual racism. There is the what we call the internalized racism, the one who is receiving the short end of the stick, who promotes racism. So you find that all of us, you know, we can stand here and says, oh, you know, we should stop, promoting the whiteness, but we do it. And the interesting thing is when we become the oppressed, we start now to protect the master who's oppressing us. Then the third type, which is the worst of the worst, which is the one that is built as a result of the first two, is what we call institutional racism. What is that? It's the differential access to the goods, services, and opportunities of society. And when the differential access becomes integral to institutions, it becomes common practice, making it difficult to rectify. And eventually, this racism dominates public bodies, private corporations, public and private universities, and is reinforced by the actions of conformists and newcomers. And there's another difficulty in reducing racism, and that's that there is no sole, true, identifiable perpetrator. So when racism is built into the institution, it emerges as the collective action of the population. Can you imagine this sickness? Think about it. We all do it. It's part of the system. What do you mean? That's accepted. Like doing the slave. Imagine when you watch movies in the 60s, right? A colored person, sir, you're not allowed to enter through the front door. There's a door for the colored people. There's a movie, you know, about how this woman was one of the engineers at NASA that enabled, the space shuttle to go to space. And you find that she had to walk half a mile. It's based on a true story, just to go use the toilet because it wasn't available for color. Can you imagine? This was the norm. And you're talking about executives and members of society who live under a democratic country for 2 centuries, who have separate doors for people of darker skin. A woman and a man a black person cannot sit in the front of the bus. We have Rosa Parks who challenged this recently. This is yesterday. Emancipation Proclamation was signed over 2 centuries before. You understand? What's the sickness we have? I mean, it was signed over 100 years ago. What I mean is with Lincoln. But I'm saying the Constitution, all men are created equal. You know, when they wrote that, they actually meant all white men are equal. So how do we break this? And you know, as Sheikh mentioned, and sister, all of you have mentioned this, we are living in our comfort zones. If it doesn't affect me and that privilege comes to me, I'm not going to fight for distribution of that privilege because I'm getting most of the money that comes from that privilege. I don't want to share it with others. So it's not my problem. But that's one sickness. The worst one is the one where you and I now support it. Like, as I mentioned the other day, Sheikh Noor in UK, right? Somebody made a comment that, you know, we have enabled him to come to our community. Can you imagine this? And I'm repeating this.
Privilege of such a comment.
No, listen to this. We've enabled. He is a man who spent his life studying, Islamic studies to come and guide others as per the Quran in Surah Al-Bara'at. Now, the ignorant one is enabling the learned one. Just think about how convoluted it is that the cart is in front of the horse, that we've enabled him. Now, if a white person comes or a light-skinned person comes, Maulana, Sheikh, Ayatollah, no problem. And I say, did we enable Sayyid Sistani? Did we enable Sayyid Khoi? Did we enable Sayyid Khomeini? Did we say, we enabled them to become the marjas? Can you imagine? Did we enable Allama Tabatabai to write the Al-Mizan fi Tafsir? This convoluted idea needs to be shattered in our children. And this notion of one skin to be superior than the other, as Sister Anisa mentioned in Surah Rum, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the earth, the sky, the languages, and the colors all as one sentence. Why? Because they're all rahmah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we have been engineered. I know even in Africa, we would look at who's the lighter skin, and if a European walks in, we think the gods have walked into our room. You know, and when the minute you're lighter skin, we stand up, we think that they're important. The minute a scholar comes with a dark skin, you're wondering, this must be a servant of the scholars, you know. This mentality has to be erased. But my fear is that institutional racism is a monster, and you cannot erase it in a day. And I promise you, if we all collectively work against it, it will realign itself like a chameleon. The way we must erase this is to establish a divine institution per the command of Allah, where you and I need to bring the principles of the divine into the perspective, and we need to dethrone this institutionalized racism and replace it with the kind of institution that Allah is pleased with. We cannot just go and cancel this one. People have tried for centuries to cancel negatives, only to find a void, and it gets replaced with something even uglier. It has to be replaced with something better. And where does it start? It starts with ourselves. It starts with our own characteristics. It starts with us when somebody makes even a slight remark. Oh, that's Abid. You know, I had this friend of mine who's an Abid. I said, excuse me, what do you mean by Abid? Do you mean he's a servant of God like you because you are an Abid? Or do you mean Abid in a derogatory way? What do you mean by that word? We use it, and it gets part of our fabric. A child is asking the mom, this little child is playing with a darker skinned child and saying, Mom, why does this child look different from me? Mom replies, well, his parents baked him longer.
Oh my God. Yeah, we have these comments all the time. Like even I can say it from the Iraqi community. We have so many different beautiful colored skinned people in our country, but the comments that come out are just horrendous. Putting people down, like you said, Hajj, in terms of using abid or baked or out in the sun too long. There was a social media actress, I think last week, from a Palestinian background who is dark-skinned herself, and she went through a whole list of things that we think are the norm and are okay to say, but they are all racist comments that we all inherently say within our communities. Now, it is important to acknowledge and to finally say these comments out loud, because I don't think there's been a time as much as now where we have been able to perhaps talk about this so openly. For years now, though, the scholars, I know Sister Anisa and I have been talking about racism within our lectures for the last years as well, but it's only now that there's a highlight to it. Only now there's full attention to it. And it's so sad that it took this murder to bring that about, but also bring the awareness within our own communities. So now that it's out, there's awareness.
But it wasn't this murder. It was hundreds of thousands, if not millions. I'm telling you, millions and millions of murders, millions. And you know what? You know what is disgusting to me? Why does a George Floyd have to receive a knee on his neck and says, I can't breathe, and then we snap? What happened to all those who received the knees before? What about those that their faces were mutilated, their bodies were cut to pieces simply because they looked at the white race in one way, and the white woman came and accused the black man that this man raped me when there was nothing to do? Like those 5 that Donald Trump says we should reenact the capital punishment and execute them all because of this 5. And all the 5 were innocent only because they were black. And why? How long do we have to wait? And you know, I'm thinking our generations, when I watch movies of people getting killed yesterday and 1,000 years from today in the past, why were those neglected when we are all preaching about Deen and Islam and going to the mosques, and we accepted this? There's something intrinsically sickening within us if we do not step up to the plate. And I always wonder why Allah keeps mentioning the story of Iblis in the Quran in various ways. Why tell me about a being who's different from me? He's made out of fire. He's not even human. Why talk to me about him? Why introduce this other creature and talk to him about his actions? Because Allah says, my rule stands. I have zero tolerance for bigotry, for racism. I have zero tolerance. I kicked this guy, this creature out who worshiped me for thousands of years. And one bigotry he had, I kicked him out. And you and I can think we can go to the pray in the front lines of our jama'ah and think that we're fine?
No, of course not. And that's the reality that we've been seeing. But it also, rather than just pointing out, because it's so easy to talk about how racist we have been, we also need to change that and redirect that energy to, like the Hajj was saying, how to eradicate that, how to change that within ourselves, our children, our communities, and how to move forward without such language being part of the rhetoric that we're using as an accepted form. And of course, it's gonna take so much work and so much reflection within our own communities. Sister, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think to go back to the question of the Ahlul Bayt and, what examples that they provide about how to approach this issue, we see that, there were stories of people of darker skin coming to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family and saying, I want to marry so-and-so. And I know that I'm not going to be able to because of my complexion. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, he would just say, well, does the girl accept? Do you think she's and he would advocate as long as both members were consenting. He would say, no problem, I'll take care of this. And he would advocate for them to get married. And so he directly intervened in trying to make the situation better. And I think that we stigmatize people in a lot of different ways. And this is, we got to be careful not to get into this oppression Olympics where we start lumping all of the problems of the world together into one. Sometimes we do that. Like we talk about this in relation to what's going on in Palestine. We talk about what's going on there to the oppression of women or the Islamophobia, and we just kind of lump it all together, and each side is competing about who has it worse than
the most oppressed.
And it's not it's very dismissive and it's very invalidating, and we need to separate these topics because each of them are important in their own way, and those who are being victims of these issues each have a story and a narrative to talk about. What inspires me about Ahlul Bayt is they didn't stigmatize anybody, right? Even people with the darkest issues, they met them in the dark places that they were in, and they helped them get through their problems. And sometimes we as a community, we just get so uncomfortable with these topics because we want to act like everything is just rainbows and lovely and perfect when it is not. So when I remember a story that I heard recently. There's quite a big homeless community here in the Syracuse, New York area. And there is a man, his name is Al-Amin Muhammad, and he was out on the streets. He was homeless. He was, dealing with drug addiction and all of this. And he said, one day my life changed when I met with his social worker, and that social worker said, I believe in you. I believe in your potential. I believe you're going to do something great one day. He had this strength-based approach with him. Now this man doesn't have any, issues with addiction anymore. He's not homeless. He's actually every week helping the homeless community here in the city, doing sandwich Saturdays and inspiring others to make changes in their life. So when somebody comes to us with an issue, whether it's racism or I'm having suicidal thoughts or I'm dealing with an addiction, or I'm, whatever taboo issue that they're struggling with, we've got to be careful not to shame people and invalidate people. We need to meet them where they are and try to understand and try to make a connection. And I think when we do that, we're following in the example of the Ahlul Bayt, right? How jahil were some of those people back then, and yet they approached them with the rahmah, right? Allah says in the Quran, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We did not send you, O Prophet, except as a mercy to the world. So we need to be merciful with one another when these comments are coming up and these struggles and injustices are being brought to our attention.
Ahsanti. Thank you, Anisa. And it's a great final thoughts on your part. Sister Sarah, what are your final thoughts?
I just wanted to add back, talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. There's this notion that's coming up now on social media that would benefit our communities, especially Muslim communities, a lot, is not only to be non-racist, but to be anti-racist. So to challenge your family members and your friends when you hear these comments, even though you would never say something like that, but even if it's an older uncle or older aunt, I know sometimes out of respect we want to bite our tongue. Sorry, but there's nothing wrong with challenging them, seeing why these comments are coming up, why they feel they need to say it. Because once you challenge them, put them on their spot, start to think, like obviously I grew up, around that sort of racism too. And when I was younger, it did kind of like those comments would come up from my end. But once somebody started challenging me, whether it a Black schoolmate or a coworker or whoever, I started to check myself. okay, why am I saying these comments? So I've been personally doing that with my parents, sometimes my close family friends, and then just kind of looking at the reaction too is interesting as well. So I just wanted to end on that note.
Thank you, Sara, for sharing that. Thank you so much. Sheikh Azhar, what are your final thoughts on whether it's this topic or everything else that we've chatted about today?
I mean, just on the topic of combating racism, I think that we got to go back to the old school principle of putting your money where your mouth is. It's wonderful to talk about these things in theory, but what I mean by putting your money where your mouth is that, you know, support businesses that are owned and operated by people of color. You know, when, you know, instead of spending your money, so really research the companies that you spend your money at. Like, so if there's a company that you know has a track record of racism, if you look at their executive board, there's not a single person of color. Maybe you shouldn't give this. You shouldn't invest in this company. Maybe you shouldn't shop at this store. So I think that we need to apply a little bit of economic pressure, and so I think that we have to empower those who are underprivileged by supporting them, supporting their businesses, supporting their organizations. Like, there's no reason why, as a Muslim, you know, we should be giving our money to Walmart. Like, go spend your money at you know, support local business. I mean, do we even know about all of the local businesses that are owned and operated by people of color? I think that's where you make the real change. And if there's a company, if there's an organization that they might have their inclusion clause in their legal documents, but is that diversity actually reflected in the way that they run their business? So we have to hold them to account with the mighty dollar, and that's the way that you make a change.
Bless you. And it's very powerful when people, in fact, do come together to do something like that. You can see the result of that. And hopefully that can also trickle to changing the mind in the way Sara was being very open about how she grew up in that environment and how she calls out people. So calling out people and using the power of money. Absolutely.
You know, in the Muslim community, we're you know, when it comes to companies that support Israel, khalas, red line. We have to have the same attitude about companies that are racist, that are prejudiced, that don't treat their employees fairly. We need to actually look into the labor practices of companies, of organizations. Are people being treated with dignity? So I think that is when you take your amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy 'anil munkar to a higher level, because we practice amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy 'anil munkar on a very superficial level when it's convenient for us. But sometimes we have to you know, inconvenience ourselves a little bit. Yeah, maybe you need to pay a little bit more to get that shirt, just so you don't support a system that exploits people.
Ahsantum. Thank you very much, Sheikhna. And Hajj Hassanain, what are your final thoughts on whether it's everything or the last discussion that we had?
Well, I think in summary, we need to be very cognizant that we must be very positive with each other. Allah says, قَوْلٌ مَعْرُوفٌ وَمَغْفِرَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِنْ صَدَقَةٍ يَتْبَعُ عَدَى. Kind speech and forgiveness is better than charity followed by injury. We as a human race feed off each other's energies, as we mentioned before. Mental health has a direct correlation to that. When you see people who are struggling with mental health, it's not because they are intrinsically born with some kind of a deformity. Many a times it's the environmental factors. It's the way we deal with people that causes people to snap and to go into those unfortunate cases. We have to deal with people with love and with embrace. Jawabir is a name of that person that was a dark-skinned person who was very poor, who comes to the Prophet and says that I'm looking to get married. And the messenger sends him to this woman by the name of Zulayfa, who was a very wealthy, beautiful girl of Medina. And he sends her there and says, go ask for her hand. And, you know, first time he goes, and they thought maybe there's a mistake because of the cultural and this racism that's so prevalent. The messenger is breaking it with kindness, with love. And she ends up accepting him, and they get married. And he becomes martyred in the Battle of Uhud. And the messenger said, observe that this one, Jawabir, has reached Shahada while he's alive.
because he says to the Prophet, when I close my eyes, I see the angels. I see, what is this, Prophet? And the Prophet says to the companions, bear witness, this man has become shaheed while he's alive, right? There are two levels of shahada. And what you find is, why did the messenger send him? It wasn't because of his outer look. It was the essence of his quality was so supreme that he needed a woman of very high quality. And he married this woman who was very pious. In fact, she goes to collect his body and the camel refuses to move. And it's because, and then when she's asking, why is the camel not moving? She was told by the Prophet that his will was that he should be buried right there, not to be taken back. You find stories like these are very prevalent. We should embrace the world with beauty. There was a research done in the 60s by a teacher who took all these white kids and says, today I'm going to do an experiment. Okay, those of you who are brown-eyed, okay, are the lower students, and the ones with the blue eyes are the superior ones. And now those of you with brown eyes have to wear something on your neck, and you're not going to eat with us. You're going to be separated, and you're not going to even have the recess time. It's basically taking privilege away from the brown-eyed kids. And you could
labeling
see on
them.
video. Oh my God, you should see how terrible they felt. They felt, yeah. Can you imagine, this is just one little aspect of brown. Imagine there's an institution on earth saying black skin is less. And then these same kids, before they were given this experiment, were all performing at very good levels, when they were doing tests. Suddenly, the brown-eyed kids were performing at half the level. Basically, their timing also was double. It took them double the time to do the same. This is all, you were talking about a 1-week experiment. This teacher conducted this just for 1 week. And the ones with the brown eyes felt so depressed, they started saying to themselves, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I don't know who I am, I'm bad. Can you imagine just 1 week of demoralization has killed their ability to grow? And these are white kids with brown eyes, okay, coming from affluent families. Then she reversed it. She said, now the blue-eyed are the bad ones. And suddenly the blue-eyed were not performing well. So imagine just a 1-week experiment degrades a small group of kids. Can you imagine doing this to a race? And I use the word race here, though there's only one race, but to an ethnic group of darker skinned people for thousands of years. And then we say, see the ghettos? You see how they're filled? You see the prisons? You see why they're filled? Because they're second class. I look at them and I say, excuse me, we are making them that. We are the ones who will be punished on Judgment Day. Those of us who are privileged, we will be the ones when Allah says, ثُمَّ لَتُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ. We will be questioned on Judgment Day. So let's meet the world with love, with grace, not the crocodile loves, the crocodile tear kind of love. No, the real one. The one where the messenger saw Bilal, told him, climb up the Kaaba and recite the adhan. That Jibreel comes and says, salam to Bilal, Habashi. Bilal becomes the commander of his army. The Arabs were stunned that this was a slave. How did he become a commander? The Prophet said, this is the Islam you're going to practice. This is the Islam we have been given as a gift of God. Let's practice this. And the solution to this is kind speech. Love everybody and remove the incendiary comments. As Allah says, قَوْلٌ مَعْرُوفٌ وَمَغْفِرَةٌ. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. This is the practice we must all practice, and let's remove all these negativities that we have, and inshallah, we will institutionalize this system. This is what Allah will do when Imam Mahdi alayhi salam comes, that he will institutionalize this. Right now, we don't have an institution like this. We have evil institutions governing us. When Islam gets fully established as the promised land, as the promised world that Allah promises, it's going to be institutionalized. That's the only way for us to win, inshallah. May Allah bless you all for sharing this time, inshallah.
Bless you, Hajj. Thank you so much, every single one of our panelists, for joining us. SubhanAllah, when we talk about positivity and change, not the same context here, but the idea of reframing. 5 years of doing the mental health through Serenity with my teammates here, and we have been so excited for our 5th year. We've gotten contact with most of you for the conference that was supposed to have been last week, and subhanAllah, because of the pandemic, we had to cancel flights, hotels, and banquet halls and everything, but we were so blessed to still be able to put this mini conference on, so to speak, to discuss relevant issues that are happening during the pandemic, and as well the tragedies that have been taking place recently, reflecting thousands of years of injustice. Inshallah, that, of course, we've just touched the tip of the iceberg, as we say here, and there's so much more. And please do join the different programs, that whether it's through Serenity, the Muslim Counsellor, the programs that Sister Anisa does, the programs through Enlight TV Media with the Hajj Hassanain, and through the Tasneem Institute with the Sheikh Azhar, to learn more about these topics and other topics, of course, related to what each speaker does. So again, a heartfelt thank you on behalf of my teammate Lorrain and Sarah for joining us today, dear speakers, and to all the participants who's joined us from all over the world. That people were quite excited when we weren't on at 3 o'clock sending messages. Where are you? So alhamdulillah, that's a good sign. I apologize for the ticking. This was the first time I used this program, and I'm so-called womaning the station here in the studio while figuring everything out with this new technology through StreamYard. But alhamdulillah wa shukr. And of course, a thank you to our sponsor, Bronze Digitals, for the beautiful poster and getting the promotion out there. Again, thank you very much. May Allah bless all of you for all of your efforts. And inshallah, we look forward to when the pandemic is over, that we actually do have our conference, and we'd love for your lovely presence to be in person here in Ottawa for different topics that are relevant around mental health. And we encourage people, please do support Muslim mental health awareness groups such as the Serenity. So go to Instagram, go to Facebook, follow, tag, share. We want to get the awareness out. I don't think we could have done this type of event here today had it not been for the diligent work over the last few years talking about basic things around mental health, whether it's looking at what is depression, what is stress, what is anxiety, what is the effects of domestic abuse and eating disorders and healthy nutrition. And now it's gone to the point where we can delve deeper in terms of how mental health impacts us on such an important level, of course, from an Islamic perspective. Thank you very much again. Jazakumullah alif khair, and have a wonderful afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I still have ticking issues.